Welcome back to Get Paid for Your Pad. Today's special guest is Ziona McIntyre, and she is the author of a book, 30 Day Stay, a real estate investor's guide to mastering the medium term rental. And she also helps people across the US find short-term rentals and mid-term rentals, and help people buy those properties to then make a great return on investment, of course, by renting it out short-term and mid-term, but you specialize in mid-terms, and that was what we're going to be talking about today. So Ziona, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Yeah, a lot of people buy for tax benefits. So that is like a major thing for people to consider too.
Right. Okay. Well, let's dive into it. The reason why I wanted to chat with you, as I mentioned, as we all know, there's regulations popping up in a lot of areas of the country, and a lot of people have either invested into a property to rent out on as a short-term rental, or they've leased a property to rent it out as a short-term rental, and now regulations come, and now they're restricted to a 30-day minimum stays, essentially, which is can be a stressful situation for people, because what do we do? Like, where do we find people that want to rent our properties for at least 30 days? What platforms can we use? What are some strategies that we can apply? Is Airbnb a good platform to find people? And that's what we're going to be discussing. So I'm excited to learn from you today, Ziona.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Talking about regulations is interesting because San Francisco recently outlawed the midterm rental. And I don't know what they put as a restriction, but I think it was maybe 6 months. I'd have to go back and look at the article. But it's the first place that didn't already have regulations in place since I started in 2020 that I'm actually seeing, wow, will this come down the pike in larger cities? It's very much a question. The way that it happened kind of in 2017 to 2019 for short-term rentals. So definitely something to watch for all of us.
Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't know that. That's kind of crazy, though. Like, they're already going after midterm rentals now. I mean, at some point, you can only rent out your place for 10 years.
Well,
You know
there's
what I
a
mean?
company called Sonder, which you may be familiar with, but I think what they did is they rented like an entire apartment building in San Francisco, and then they were renting everything out furnished midterm rental or something like that. But that large presence kind of killed it for all the little guys that were just doing it on their one apartment, because the city was like, oh, we can't do this. It's too many. So I don't think that will be the case everywhere, but definitely something to just note.
Yeah, I'm sure like a lot of people don't think that that's even a possibility, that they would go after 30-day rentals even. But yeah, that's good to know.
Mhm.
But yeah, let's talk about some strategies here. The first thing I wanted to touch on is what are some platforms where we can find midterm renters, people that are looking for 30-day. And a midterm rental, is that 30-day or 28-day? I get confused sometimes. I see different numbers out there.
Yeah, I think it's really 30 days. I mean, I think people get fancy on 28 because of February, but let's be serious. Let's just make it what it is. So I think most regulations around where they say what is a short-term rental versus what is a long-term rental, because midterm rentals are in that long-term rental bucket, it's that 30-day line.
Gotcha. So what are the best platforms to list? Is there an Airbnb for 30-day stays?
Kind of. There is a website called Furnish Finder, and that can be a good place. That was born out of the travel nurse movement. There's lots of travel nurses out in the US, all
Mm-hmm.
over. And so it really started with them, but now it's gained so much popularity. It tends to be a little bit cheaper than Airbnb. So you're seeing a lot of students and people that maybe just traveling around the US and going to do shorter, um, I guess slower travel where it's longer stays. And then, yeah, just different families and things. So Furnish Finder is a good option, and their platform is only like maybe $125 per listing for an entire year. So it's very affordable, and they don't take any fees like an Airbnb takes a percentage.
Mm-hmm.
Airbnb is a great platform to be on for midterm stays. The only thing to consider is that its algorithm doesn't favor us as longer term renters. The reason being is that when you get a longer term stay, so say you got a 3-month booking in Airbnb, the way that they see it is that even though you're booked and on their platform, they see you closing your calendar for 3 months. And so
Mm-hmm.
they penalize you for that, and you actually drop quite low in the search rankings.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not a perfect science. What I have found recently that works really good with Airbnb is that if you utilize smart pricing, that gives you a boost in their algorithm and you show up higher. And for years, we've all said, oh, smart pricing is junk. Don't use that. Use Price Labs or some other outside party. But I've found that that's the only way to really maintain your rank in
Mm.
Airbnb. So that's a nice
Interesting.
little trick. Yeah. And
Yeah.
the third site I'd say that's really important, just the top threes, we can talk about a bunch more. But the top three would be Airbnb, Furnish Finder, and Zillow. So Zillow is a place you would normally look for a long-term rental, but the midterm rentals are gaining steam there with furnished options.
Gotcha. That's interesting about the smart pricing on Airbnb. And does this smart pricing? Are you still in control of your prices? Can you set a base price just like in Price Labs or Wheelhouse, or is it more like you just turn it on and Airbnb will just take it over and you have no control over it?
You have a min and a max price. That's basically all of the functionality that you get. I think there's also the ability to do like a discount for a week, for a month, something like that. But it's pretty limited. And I think it does trend on the low end, just because they do want to just get it
Mm-hmm.
booked. That's like sort of their prerogative, right? Um, but I think
Mm-hmm.
that if you set your min to something that you're happy with and it's a 30-day stay anyway, you're not necessarily competing with the same price per night that somebody is doing on a nightly stay. So you're going to potentially
Yeah.
show up higher
Yeah.
because you're
Exactly.
like, oh,
Yeah.
I'm
If
so
you
much
were to
cheaper than everybody
rent
else.
out short term, I
Yeah.
think using that Airbnb smart pricing is not it's not really beneficial. But yeah, to your point, if it's a midterm rental and you say, hey, you know what, I want $3,000 a month. I just set my minimum price at 100 a night, and then just turn on the smart pricing. And if that's going to help with the search results, then that would be great. Is there a specific place for guests to book 30-day stays, or if I'm looking for a 30-day stay, would I just go in the regular Airbnb website and just put in those parameters? Because I remember
Yeah.
like a while ago they had a special long or midterm or long term portal where you could go.
Oh, through
That
Airbnb?
yeah, yeah. This
Oh,
is a while ago. I
interesting.
don't know. Might be
Okay,
like
well, I
six,
don't
seven
know.
years
I
ago.
don't travel as a guest as much. It's so funny that we who offer services do not partake in the same services. So, like when I travel, I do a lot of pet sitting, and that's like a free offering. So I'm not paying as much. So yeah, I don't actually know how it looks on the side of the guest, but what I do see is that Airbnb's fees make it so much more expensive. So I think they have talked about changing that. And that's why a lot of people are going to websites like Furnish Finder for these
Hmm.
types of stays because that extra, depending on what Airbnb is throwing on there, could be as much as like 14% or something. It can really amp up that price. Yeah.
Yeah. And if I book like a 3 month stay on Airbnb, do I pay that service fee over the total amount, or do they like cap it at like a month or so?
Airbnb doesn't have a cap. Verbo does. And I can't remember what it is off the top of my head right now, but they do limit how much they're taking in fees.
Hmm. Um,
Yeah.
so when it comes, so you mentioned Furnished Finders. Are there any other websites outside of Zillow and Furnished Finder, like would, for example, the good old Craigslist? Would that be a good place to post up some
No,
ads?
God, no. I mean, maybe for somebody, but I just don't think that you're getting the volume of people there anymore. So, what's
Yeah.
important to kind of consider is who's the guest avatar that you're attracting. If
Hmm.
you're looking for those travel nurses, they can be great because they're traveling generally for 3-month contracts, and sometimes they'll extend and have a 6-month stay. But travel nurses often are traveling by themselves or maybe one partner or child. And so they're wanting those smaller units, so like 1 to 2 bedrooms. So if that's what your portfolio has, that might be who you target. If you have larger properties, so we're talking like 4 bedrooms, and you want to see if maybe you can do midterm stays, that avatar is going to be more families. And usually, where families are needing these homes is because of some kind of insurance loss. So maybe they had a
Hmm.
fire or a flood in their house, and they're using their insurance company to place them somewhere else. So there is another kind of avenue of going through insurance um, companies or recruiters or something that are placing people for those things. So I can give
Yeah.
you a couple of those, but really there's a lot of them. So some of the top ones would be ALE Solutions, CRS, which is assured relocation. So they do relocation placements.
Mhm.
Um, I would say the other one that's pretty good is HomeLink, but I have a bunch. So if somebody's really interested in kind of looking into that, they can either message me or they can actually use something like ChatGPT, and you can see in your area, say you're Atlanta, you could say what placement agencies or corporate housing websites are in my area, and you could actually list yourself on a lot of them. Most of them don't require a full listing like an Airbnb. It's more that you give them all the information once and you're in their database, and then they'll call you if they need something in your area. So I
Mm.
think the only thing that's a little tricky about these is that if you develop relationships, you can potentially have them be back to back. If you don't maintain relationships and like really work on that, it really can be a one-off thing. And so I think it's harder, and I
Mhm.
haven't had consistent success with it. So I tend to keep to the smaller units if I'm going to do only midterm.
Mhm. So, I guess what are some other players? So we talked about Furnish Finders, talked about Zillow, uh, insurance. People who have like damage on their house or something, or have to move. I think uh, that's a really good guest avatar, because like what I heard, and let me know if you see this as well. But insurance companies, they just want people to be happy. They just went through something traumatic, right? So the insurance
Mhm.
companies are not very price sensitive, right?
Yeah,
You can charge like good prices. Um,
you definitely can. Hmm.
yeah. What are some other type of travelers that would be looking for this type of accommodation? Like I'm thinking, I've heard construction workers sometimes have to be in an area for a couple months. Consultants,
Yeah.
although consultants typically stay at a hotel. I think mostly for the points.
Yeah.
What are some
It
other
really
what are some
can
other people?
depend. So I remember a friend of mine saying if you go to an extended stay hotel, so there's actually one pretty close in my neighborhood. And he's like, if you go there around 7 o'clock, see what trucks are in the parking lot
Hmm.
and call those numbers. It might be
Right.
construction companies that are placing a bunch of their workers for certain projects, and maybe they need some more housing in your area, or you can just be on their list for next time. So I think that
Hmm.
if you're going to be really consistent with midterm stays, or you're going to build out a portfolio in one area, it does make sense to do some of this legwork, but it's a lot harder than if you were just doing a short-term rental and you just put it on Airbnb and you say, just let the bookings come in. Let's see what happens. Like, this is more like, do you want to call the universities? Do you want to call different companies and see who's hiring? All of that works, but could it be lots of hours of trying? So
Man,
you have to
that
kind of weigh
almost
your
sounds like a
time.
real business.
Hmm.
Like we have to hustle.
Well, it's gotten harder. I do actually think that since that my book came out, there's a lot more people doing it, and it might also just be the timing of short-term rentals just getting tighter for people, that so many are forced into the midterm rental space, and so then
Mhm.
you have too much inventory, right? So it really depends market to market. I still hear about markets that need more, but a lot of markets are flush. So yeah, just do your research before you buy.
Yeah. No, 100%. No, I think you mentioned a good point that it's not just the regulations that are forcing people into the midterms. It's also, as you mentioned, people have been buying properties based on 2021 or 2022 numbers, and now
Mhm.
they're realizing, ooh, I'm not making my mortgage payment or I'm not making my rent. I gotta figure something else out, right? So, um, yeah, those I love those out of the box thinking strategies of like, going to literally going to hotels and seeing if there's any trucks outside or vans with any company names. And I've even heard people like they will sit at the bar and like engage in conversation with people and trying to figure out like who are these people, where they're coming from, like, who's the person to reach out to, because like, yeah, you can have a company name, but if you talk to actually one of the workers or and ask them like, hey, who within your company arranges this, buy the
Yeah.
person a drink. It's
Sure.
yeah, it's the hustle.
There are definitely people, so I'll drop Jesse's name. He wrote a bonus chapter for our book, but Jesse Vasquez teaches specifically how to do midterm rental where it's working through the placement agencies. So he has a lot of
Mhm.
strategies for how to cold call or find the right person, and then, creating drip campaigns of keeping up with them. It just never was part of my strategy. That felt like a lot. But then I have heard of people that once they develop those relationships, people just come back to them instead of looking in the database because they
Mhm.
already know and trust them and know that they have a good product. So it really
Right.
depends on, are you going to be that guy in this area, and do you have enough properties? So what do you want to build?
It's funny you mentioned Jesse Vasquez, and I just heard there's going to be a midterm rental conference here in San Diego, where
Yeah.
I am,
Oh, I didn't know you were in San
literally in,
Diego.
in a
Awesome.
week and a half. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So for anybody who's interested in learning more about midterm rentals, uh, April 21st to the 23rd, there is a midterm rental conference, and it looks like Jesse is the one who organizes that, and
He
it's going to
is,
be at
yeah. We spoke at it last year, me and my co-author of the book. And yeah, I'm not going this year, but it's a great time.
yeah, yeah. Let's see if I can maybe pop in somehow. Tickets are $900, so not sure if I want to pay that, um, but yeah, that's interesting. So, so I'm thinking, what are some other strategies? Like, is there anything else that people can do like outside of like the OTAs, Airbnb, and um, because I feel like developing those relationships with the insurance companies and like figuring out which companies are visiting your area, and that's kind of like a, I guess there's a lot of work on the front end, but to your
Yeah.
point, like once you have those relationships, it could also become like a very, almost like a passive business, when you have enough people that are reaching out and wanting to stay, and obviously they're staying for like 1, 2, 3 months, so you don't have to
Yeah.
constantly find new people every week.
So there are, depending where your properties are. So I know somebody in Austin who has a placement. Um, I don't know if she's got like a membership or something, how she works it, but you can be in her database for a fee, and she places those insurance companies at your property. And it's because she's built so many relationships that now she needed more properties, and now that she has more properties, they tend to just come to her because it's just easier that way, right? So even though
Hmm.
they're not all hers, they're her database. So that's worked
Hmm.
really well for her. I know someone else who does it. Around New Orleans and then Virginia and Philadelphia. So, kind of around Washington, D.C., and then Philadelphia. So, there are different people that are doing kind of like how you guys are just doing revenue management. It's almost a slice. You're not doing the whole property management, you're just doing a slice of it. And maybe that's the
Hmm.
most important slice for them. So, these
Yeah.
people they're doing just 20%, but their placing for that first month is 20%, but you might have an 8-month booking. So all of these companies are kind of popping up. So if you are in that market, it might be valuable while you're building your own relationships to kind of plug into a larger system.
Hmm.
And I've also found that with my properties, I tend to buy in areas where I can still legally short term, but I prefer midterm. So I try to just fill in my gaps with short term, and that works well for me.
Mm,
So there's all kinds of little hybrid strategies you can be using as well.
right. Okay. Yeah. So that's interesting. So there's situations where you are allowed to do short term, but midterm is just more profitable, right? And that's a
I
good
just find it to be
situation.
easier. So it doesn't
Easier, right?
necessarily become more profitable. I just, yeah, I just like setting a tenant and not thinking about it for 3 to 6 months. I think that's really
Mm-hmm.
nice. It's
Yeah.
lighter on bookkeeping, cleaning, turnovers, expenses. So even though you may not have the same boost in certain times, you still do have seasonality. So you can charge more in certain months. And I think because I've been in the game a while, I don't need every single penny. And I have lower mortgages, right? So for me, I'm kind of going after ease, and everybody is in a different part of their real estate investing arc, right? So some people really want to
Mm-hmm.
squeeze every dollar or need to do that.
Sure. So when you're in a market where short-term rentals are allowed, but you're choosing to do midterm, do you then block out maybe Christmas and New Year or like the peak dates so you can take advantage of those particular dates for short-term rentals, or do you just try to fill it up completely with monthly rentals?
Yeah, so what I was doing is making it so that it's a 30-day minimum if it's anything out of 2 weeks. So usually I would just say, like, if I have any last minute gaps, those last 2 weeks can be a 2 night stay. But anything out, because I'd open my calendar for a year and just have a lot of availability, so my property's showing up in searches, um, I want that all to be 30 days. So that's kind of how I
Mm-hmm.
manage it for the most part.
Yeah. And then do you allow anybody to book a 30-day stay starting at any day, or do you block certain areas of the calendar? So maybe like
So,
you want
yeah,
like
it really depends on if it's only midterm, like, because I do have a couple properties where it's 30 days and that's it. So then you have to be really careful with your calendar. So I don't let someone book out because then I can end up having that weird 3 week gap. And then I'm like, what do I do with that? Right. So I'm looking for someone for the very next availability. So in that case, I might shorten up the availability, or I just, turn people down if they're sending a request. I don't just let them instant book.
hmm. So I guess one of the reasons that people are attracted to short-term rentals is because obviously it's a lot more work, but at the same time, you also, if you have a guest that you don't really enjoy hosting, then they're also going to leave pretty soon. Like, have you
Yeah.
have you ever had somebody book like a 3 month stay or something, and after a week you're like, oh, kind of want this person to leave?
Yes, I have. I think that generally with a midterm, they settle down. So there are the same kind of questions that happen in that first 3 days, as someone's learning your house. But if you're doing short term, that 3 days happens again and again and again, right? You're like constantly in this Groundhog Day.
Hmm.
But if you're doing midterm, sometimes it's like, okay, they're a little bit needy or something at the beginning, and then they sort of figure it out and they're on their own. So, yeah, I think it generally mellows out. And sometimes you just have a hard guess.
Hmm. Sure. Now, I know some people are also concerned about squatters because I think this is state dependent. But certain
Yes.
states, I think if you do 28 or 30 days or longer, now it's considered a tenant, and if the tenant doesn't want to leave, now there's tenant protection and all of that stuff.
Yeah.
Any advice on that?
Well, the best thing to do is to actually have a lease. So you can have, something in your welcome message that says, we need to also create a lease on offline after you book. Otherwise, we'll have to terminate your booking within 24 hours, or however you want to do that. So it's mostly a problem in California, is kind of what I hear. But I've not heard of anyone personally that had an issue with a squatter. So I think it's sort of one of those really scary worst case scenarios, but I don't know how actually common it is.
Hmm. Sure. Yeah. Um, Very cool. Is there anything we haven't touched on yet that you think is important to discuss? Anything that I don't know that I don't know?
That's interesting. I just think as a midterm stay now the competition is really coming up, so you need to have your properties be as professional and as beautiful as you're doing with the short-term rentals. And I imagine more and more amenities are going to be coming into play. Before it was really like back in the day with short-term rental where it was just a furnished property. It could be anything, right? And now everything is professionally designed and decorated. So yeah, I think just keeping up with that and deciding if that's going to be the avenue you want to go down. I think a lot of times people take a long-term rental that's working for them and say, well, I just want more. Should I furnish it? And I think it's important for people to really calculate, okay, maybe the furniture, depending on the size of your property, could be $10,000 to $20,000 more. So even if you're going to get $1,000 a month more, what time horizon for paying that back makes actual sense for you?
Mm-hmm.
I tend to think if it's not broken, don't try to fix it. For long-term rentals, at least, yeah.
Yeah. And the last question: do you offer any upsells to the people that stay with you? Maybe like the
Yeah.
cleanings or laundry services, or I don't know, any other upsells that you do?
I don't. So Jesse is one of those people who does an upsell. He offers a car often on Turo, and so he does something like that. So that can be something that you can have as just a car waiting for them in the driveway, especially if you're, accommodating nurses, that might be a good thing. And I've heard of people offering like a grocery service where you essentially do like an Instacart or have your cleaners get them groceries to start. While I think that could build good relationships and get good feedback, it sounds pretty labor intensive. So I have not coordinated that sort of thing myself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and by the way, I personally love Turo. I don't own a car, so probably like once or twice a month, if I want to go somewhere for the weekend, I'll get a car in Turo, and it's a great app. I absolutely love it. It's renting a car is one of those things that like I feel like it's so outdated. The process, you know what I mean? Like you go to this company and they put you have to fill out all these forms, and then they just spend so much time in the computer and typing in all this stuff, and you're just like, it's got to be a faster way to do this. And with Turo, it's just you just a couple clicks on the app and you get your car, and usually it opens remotely or the keys inside. You just show up, get in, start the car, and you're off. It's so much better than renting a car in a traditional way.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, there's so many cool hacks that people do with getting a whole fleet of cars. So, I mean, you definitely can get into that
Yeah.
if that's something that's exciting for you.
No, that's true. I actually met some full-time Turo entrepreneurs over the last year or so who have like 20, 30 cars on Turo, and that's their business, So it's almost like you're having your own rental car business through the app. It's kind of comparable to how Airbnb kind of allowed everybody to start their own short-term rental business. Turo's kind of empowered everybody to start their own rental car company. So awesome. Yeah. Well, I appreciate you jumping on here. Definitely learned some things, and I think more and more people are looking at midterm rentals as a potential alternative to short-term rentals. If the short-term rental doesn't work for you for whatever reasons, if it's regulations or just the performance isn't what you were expecting, then midterm rentals can definitely be an alternative solution for you. And any final thoughts before we wrap up?
Well, if anybody wants to reach out to me, if you have any further questions that maybe I didn't cover, I'm really active on Instagram, so check me out there at Ziona McIntyre. Thanks.
Awesome. And then don't forget to buy the book as well if you're interested. And with that said, Ziona, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I'm sure we'll have you back another time. Good luck with everything. And to the listeners, hope you enjoyed this episode, and we will be back next week. Have a great weekend.